Howdy, everybody. Welcome. Welcome. I didn't think we'd be doing a podcast episode this soon, but today is a little bit of a special one. I'm reacting to the DAO pause that was just recently announced, and we have a bit more information now on what that means. So today's going to be a reaction and a commentary about that. I didn't think I'd be doing this episode. I'm surprised to see all this happening. Nonetheless, here we are. It's time to talk about it. Disclaimer is that I do not represent the Sandbox Game or the DAO Foundation. I am not your financial or legal advisor. Nothing I say is to be taken as financial or legal advice. When I say the word SIP, I mean Sandbox Improvement Proposal. When I say DAO, I mean Decentralized Autonomous Organization. And when I use the word SandFam, I'm talking about the Sandbox community, those who participate in the people, product, and purpose of the Sandbox ecosystem. That ecosystem looks a little bit like this. Where in the people side, you have everything from the gamers to the team. The product is everything from the game client to inclusive of the DAO tech stack. The purpose goes over the white paper and then all the things expounded upon by the founders, CEOs, and leadership. I need probably now to add the new CEO to it, which is no longer Arthur Madrid, but it's also now Robby Yung. So I'll probably end up changing that. Although with today's episode, this all might be coming to an end rather soon. So might not even need to update it. Today's episode is about the DAO. Reminder, if you want to learn more about the DAO, there is a DAO education hub within the sandbox. It's located at coordinate 2, comma 154, negative 154, excuse me. It's in the bottom left of the map, right next to Jurassic Park. So if you just navigate down to the bottom left, you'll see Jurassic Park there. The Sandbox DAO is to the top right of it, and that's where you'll find the DAO Education Hub. It's where you can go to learn about the DAO, its process, and it was a big hit when we put it together. We had over 60 people play testing and watching and and being involved in that. And that was a lot of fun to make and provide to the DAO. So check it out if you want to learn more about the DAO in a more gamified way. My name's Lanzer. I'm your host, and I've been a landowner, avatar owner, studio since 2021, and been in alpha season 6 or 5, I think it was, our floor droppers. And then more recently, we delivered on a SIP to provide a DAO education, a gamified DAO education experience. So for this particular episode, I'm going to make a disclosure, and that disclosure is that I am a Mocha. So I own Mocha. I'm Mocha fam. Also, I've been participating in their more recent Mocha portfolio. They call it Mocha Proof, and so I have a Mocha cat. A lot of Mochas in that sentence. But anyways, I've been participating in that and trying to believe it's part of their AIR initiative where they are building a blockchain layered around reputation. But in any case, an important disclosure for this episode is that I am a Mocha. In addition to being World of Women, Bulls on the Block, I'm an ape. But for this episode, Mocha, that way you can all know that I'm part of the ecosystem there, as well as being in the sandbox. So let's get into it. We actually need to take a step back to December, a couple months ago now, as it's February 3rd. And there was an AMA by the new CEO, Robby Yung. Now, all this came about because back in August, and this is something I was going to show with my interview with Yatsu, as I mentioned on X, that's been rescheduled. We've been trying to reschedule it, just haven't been able to make the schedule align. I really hope we get to interview Yat. However, back in August, that's the wrong slide. Excuse me. Here we go. This is what I was going to show during my talk with Yat if the conversation went that way. If not, then this is as good a time as any, really. So back in August, there was a report that came out by the big whale, and then confirmed by different people after that 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 the leadership at Sandbox was removed. Then that was Sebastian Bourget and Arthur, and that there's a takeover happening, all that sort of stuff. Anyways, the wording is way off in my opinion, as Animoca always had an investment in the Sandbox and owned it as of 2018. So there was no takeover, because they had already owned it. It is a wholly owned subsidiary of Animoca Brands through Bacasable. We went over that in another episode, episode 34, in the birth of the DAO. Anyways, but there was a leadership change. So Robby Yung came in as the CEO, who was investment in Animoca, or CEO of investments in Animoca. I go over that later on. Anyways, this happens. There's a big shuffle, and it started in August of last year, and now I kept track of like what statements were made and all that sort of stuff here, who was saying what. Arthur confirming that yes, there were some layoffs, they were consolidating, and there was an article there about how Animoca was increasing its involvement. And the funny thing is that like the day before all this happened, all this broke, Yat was on the stage with Seb. So it clearly wasn't as negative as it was portrayed back by the big whale. However, there were layoffs, there was a restructuring of sorts. Arthur and Seb took on different roles, although they are still like Seb is still very much a part of the Sandbox, as is Arthur. And there's just a new CEO who wanted to restructure and bring Sandbox into what they're now calling version 3. So all of these folks here in this order are the things that I noted relevant to the realignment, as I called it. It was a realigning of the Sandbox. And um, so that's what we're going to go over today. Some things that are relevant to that. So it started back in December when Robby Yung, the new CEO for Sandbox, came on and did an AMA with the Masari report, and speakers were Panda Pops, Robby, Masari, and Rick, and then also the Sandbox handle. That's not what I was looking for. I was looking for not that either. It's not really working out very well like I want it to. There we go. So down there in the bottom right, you can see here's the actual recording itself, and then yeah, so it was December 15th is when they had it. And instead of going through all of it was about 30 minutes, so it's a pretty quick one. Instead of playbacking and recording through it, what I'm going to do instead is just I have some bite-sized things I took out of there, and we'll just go through that. If you'd like to watch it yourself, you can go to the Sandbox Game handle, and it'll be there from December, and yep, it's there for you to listen to. But here is what I took away from it. It introduced Robby Yung as the new CEO of Sandbox Company. He wasn't a new figure to the Sandbox. However, he was new in that role, and this was his first introduction in the role to the Sandbox community. So he was new CEO, and what was interesting is when you looked at his LinkedIn, which anyone can really look at, you'll see that here it is, Robby Yung. He is based out of the UK, but when you look down at his experience, He's been CEO of Animoca Brands, CEO of investments for Animoca Brands for the past 11 years. So, like I said, he's not new to the ecosystem at all. And even down there in the sandbox, he's chief executive officer since August 2025. Not surprised to see that date because that's when everything kicked off. However, he's been in a director role since October of 2019. So, most certainly not new to the sandbox operations, but new to the community, I would say, newly introduced to the community in the chief executive officer capacity. So, yeah. Um, so, the first thought was Robby Yung is not new to the sandbox ecosystem. Director role since 2019. All right. And part of Animoca Brands for 11 years, as it's mentioned up here. So here's LinkedIn. You have to be logged in order to see everything. But yeah, it'll be right there. So about 10 minutes in, it was my first takeaway was that when Robbie mentioned that the ambition was to merge the sandbox idea with the blockchain and to enable creators to create, own, and monetize. So this was they're talking about the ambition when they originally acquired the sandbox. And again, I'm referring to the December 2025 AMA with Robby Yung. And that one is here. Oh, I remember now why I brought that open. So if you go to this tweet here, you'll see in the comments when I X space GPT'd it. It's basically a transcript summary that you can do. I use it all the time. It's a great tool. But anyways, it tells you who's speaking and gives you some highlights here that you can go over. But so you can reference this pretty easily if you'd like. However, I pulled it over here on this slide some highlights. So about 10 minutes in, the ambition was to merge the sandbox with blockchain, and that would enable creators to create, own, and monetize. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play that for you all. We're just going to play some sections, and here is the XSpace GPT of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find that here in the transcript. And then I'm going to play it. There it is. Okay.
And so I think one of the things about Sandbox was from the time that we brought them into the Animoca Brands family, our ambition with Sandbox was to see how we could merge what they had created in terms of a platform focusing on user-generated content, which was a Web 2 game at the time, and merge that idea with the incredible blockchain rails that we had discovered, not too long before, and figure out how we could really enable creators in a new sort of digital asset enabled world to be able to create and own and monetize their stuff. And so that was really where the idea came from.
So there you have it. That was the first takeaway I had. The second takeaway was about 13 minutes in when he really started to reveal what the restructuring was all about. Let's see if I can make it a little bigger. He was able to start to reveal why this realignment was happening. And here it is.
But I think one of the things that we didn't focus on enough from day one was we were concentrating on using Sand as the utility token for the Sandbox universe, when actually, one of the things we've learned now that we've been in the blockchain space, going on 8 years, 9 years, is that actually it's possible to have a utility token that can be the foundation of lots and lots of different things and not necessarily just one core product focus. And so I think one of the things that we've been spending a lot of time on this year is building the foundation for how can we support creators both within the Sandbox 3D metaverse interactive space, but also outside of it as well.
So that kind of gives you your first tip off of what's really happening here. It's clear at this point that the sandbox is expanding beyond the sandbox, right? So we're talking about later on a spoiler alert, sandchain and corners, but also a more generic utility for the sand token. So you're already starting to see the writing on the wall for how we got to where we are now, which is a pausing of the DAO. But it started back here when Robby became CEO, needed to make a change based on the results and the performance of the sandbox. And part of that now is reimagining what the sand token is used for. And that's why you're seeing things like sand chain and corners. Okay, so the next thing was about 16 minutes in, so about a minute later, he starts talking about what it is that they're actually thinking of doing, because it was not just sand and corners, but also um, some AI stuff as well.
So we're really thinking a lot now of how technology has changed and evolved and how we can start, adopting, for example, new AI-based content creation tools that we can leverage to help make that process for our creators not just easier, but potentially more sophisticated, to give them more powerful tools to allow them to create much more complex experiences.
Okay, and that's probably a nod to how easy it is to create in the sandbox, but how while there are creations being made, many thousands of experiences, player retention is not that great. And it's been a problem for the sandbox for a really long time. A lot of the community has known it. We've been trying to fix it. We've been trying to use the DAO also to do that. We didn't get very far. And unfortunately, the pause really cuts that short in a way that I think is unfair. However, um, as as you can hear what Robbie's saying, he's clearly he's clearly researched this. He's clearly has a handle on what is happening in the sandbox and why this change is needed. And I can't fault him at all for wanting to pivot or redirect and restructure or realign, whatever word you'd like to use. You can start to understand why that's happening, and that he's coming across as someone who didn't just plop into the middle of all this. He's been following along and has come with a plan. So seems to be a very well spoken individual, and yeah. So let's keep going. Let's go to so not just expanding beyond the sandbox and generic utility, but also leveraging new technology to, in his words, create more complex experiences. That might be a nod to Roblox. I'm not sure, but in our case, maybe they've done an assessment where the simplicity is too much and it's not as engaging, and that might be why player retention is so low. Maybe that's something internal that they've discovered. So that might be the whole complex experiences reference. I'm not sure. Okay. Next is about 18 minutes in. He starts talking about the initiatives that they've launched, Sandchain and and corners.
So I think there are a couple of initiatives that we've launched recently. One is Sandchain, which is being done in partnership, and Sandchain is essentially an infrastructure layer for creators who create Web 2 content who are interested in how they can essentially bridge their content into the digital asset world. Because as we know in Web 2, you're often restricted and siloed to the areas in which the platforms in which you create your content, and you don't actually get any ownership of that content. And so one of the things we're trying to do is create an infrastructure layer that leverages the power of sand to allow them to engage with their communities, but in a digital asset venue where they can actually have, the majority of the ownership, as opposed to the ownership residing with the platform. So I think that's kind of the view from the sand chain point of view. And then we also launched another product, actually just last week, called Corners. And Corners is again powered by sand, and part of the sand ecosystem. And Corners is actually specifically focused on the idea of curation.
So there are two products right there that he mentioned, Sandchain and Corners, and it kind of explains what that expanding beyond the sandbox is to make it more of a generic utility. So they mentioned the word AI, complex experiences, and all, that to me is more about leveraging new technology so that they can stay ahead of the curve and remain competitive in the market. Saying all the right things. Certainly, as someone who would come in as a new CEO to realign and focus efforts. So you're starting to see a picture even before we get to yesterday's AMA on SIP-39. And yeah, next up was one small reference about Sandbox and its placement.
So I think, obviously I hope Sandbox continues to be a key cornerstone of the creator economy in Web3. I'm really proud of what the team have built over the last 5 years and the success they've achieved. Sandbox is, I think you can pretty inarguably say, the home for brands in Web3. Most traditional Web 2 or consumer brands that have a presence in Web 3 often have it through, their holdings of land and experiences they've created in Sandbox, which is.
I'm really glad that he gave props and respect to the team. This is normal to hear when realignments are pending, when new leadership comes in to rearrange, realign, change things up, or refocus efforts. Is giving paying respect to the efforts of the team so you don't not to demoralize what's about to happen, which is all the restructuring and the layoffs, and to kind of reassure and give more confidence about the future. So that to me is pretty that's to be expected, and I appreciate that he did do that. And I think the main thing I want to point out there is that Yat mentioned not long ago that it was on the podcast with Anna Solana, I believe. Can't recall the podcast name at the moment, but he mentioned that Sandbox continued to be a strategic initiative. Um, and he mentioned the brand recognition. He also mentioned it was a home for brands. And so here you see Robbie repeating that. And the thing I noted there was that he said hope. He hopes that it continues to be. And to me, that is one of the reasons why he's there, is because there was Sandbox, as we all know, if you've been in this community, you know that the player retention has been a big problem. It just hasn't really caught like Roblox has. We get tons of new people, they just don't stay. So while Animoca would love for it to continue to be a strategic initiative, there was a realignment that needed to happen in order for that to stay a reality. So here I see that word as a pretty important tip off that Robbie is attempting to ensure that it continues to be a strategic uh, initiative, a player, a factor, and it remains the home for brands. So his realignment is to make that happen, and the word hope there is to note that they're in the process of doing that, and as it stands right now, it's uncertain if it will continue to be. But that's why he's here to ensure that it does. to refocus and realign. And our last thing was he was about to get into it is what their ambition is. It kind of is similar to what we've just went over, but it does drive home, I think, a good point about what we could expect back in December and what we are now seeing.
Fantastic. But I think our ambition is to try to grow, the community of both Sandbox, but also Sand, even bigger. And so part of how we're trying to do that this year is really to focus on other aspects of the creator economy that we can help add that underpinning of liquidity, as you mentioned, with the Sand token. So doing that both through corners and through the Sand chain. But I think also continuing to figure out how we can support creators, because at the end of the day, the major difference between Web 2 and Web 3 is ownership. And
And that's something you hear, yeah, Robbie, everyone and Seb say the same thing, the difference between Web 2 and Web 3 is ownership. But I wanted to really highlight there what exactly stuck out to me was right after he says, I hope Sandbox continues to be a key cornerstone, he then says, our ambition is to try and grow the community of both. So adding the Sandbox and Sand even bigger. So there's, again, if it wasn't obvious, is now they're looking to expand beyond what the Sandbox has been offering thus far, which is a metaverse within a game client, the game the game maker and box edit, all the things that we already went over here in the ecosystem. So the product of the Sandbox, he's saying that it's not. I'm not gonna put words in his mouth, but from what I intuit, my opinion is that they've assessed that the product needs to be expanded because it's currently not doing what they expect it to do, and they're not seeing the results that they would expect to see. Which, if you've been in the community, you know that that's true. You know that the sandbox has been struggling, like I mentioned with player retention. So a change needs to happen. You adapt or die, and Robbie seems to be here to ensure that we adapt. So that's what I'm reading out of this. Right, the new CEO is here to focus and realign the sandbox's efforts to adapt. How do I say this? To adapt to, I don't want to say disappointing because Sandbox has done some really cool things. To recover? No. To maybe recover is a fine word. Um, there we go. To improve. To improve the Sandbox's performance. I think that's probably a fair word. So my opinion of why he's here, and it seems to me true, that the new CEO, Robbie, is here to focus and realign the sandbox's efforts to improve its performance. And maybe Robbie himself might disagree with those two words, to improve the sandbox's performance, but I think I'm close enough. I think I'm in the ballpark. The sandbox performance just hasn't been what most of us wanted. Um, I was gonna do an episode as a studio myself, as MetaWorld Studio, how we weren't able to make a living, and my experience wasn't the only one. There, some of the biggest studios had to bow out from the sandbox because the play to earn model didn't work within the sandbox to where they could have a self-sustaining income. I saw that myself, having jumped in 2021, got into Game Maker in 2022 and 2023. I received a Game Maker grant, but even then, the monetization just wasn't there. We ran into some big difficulties getting buy-in from the Sandbox team on the NFT collection. We were able to push that out, but that's when they transitioned to Catalyst. You then had to buy Catalyst. We weren't funded for that, so I had to buy them myself. And then even then, the NFT collection didn't sell, and there was no other monetization that we could get out of that. So ever since then, just been kind of limping along, and that's when the DAO came out in 2023, excuse me, 2024 in May, and where I was going to exit the community myself because we had come to the end of our rope on what was possible for Meta Worlds funding itself, not having a sustainable income. But then the DAO came, and because I have an entrepreneurial background, business, I'm a gamer. I love governance and leadership. The DAO is exactly what I needed. It was right up my alley. So I jumped into the DAO. And eventually, we were able to earn a grant from the DAO when we won the request for proposal competition, and then we produced the DAO Education Hub, and we earned the 30,000 that was the grant, and that was the first time, and that was a year later. So just earlier last year, we did that, and without that, Meta Worlds would still have not had any business as it had for the past year before that. So there's the business of Sandbox as a studio is tough. It is self-sustain. It is not self-sustaining. There was no sustainable income, and that I think is part and parcel as to what we're talking about. What I'm talking about when I say improve the sandbox performance. Um, part of it's Part of it is, I think most of it's player retention. We get a lot of new wallets. They just don't stay. And there's many reasons for that. And I think that's one of the reasons why Robby is here to address the part that needs to be improved. So there is December 2025. And the reason why I spent so much time on December 2025 is when yesterday the AMA was hosted, the playback bug struck. And so there was no way to review the recording from yesterday. I mistakenly did not record it, so that was my fault. And I did not see that anyone else had recorded it either. So unfortunately for all of us, most especially for me, there was no way to see the recording. So what I did and what others did was we posted what notes that we did have, and I'll be going over soon in the forums what that was. So you can see the reactions are varied. I tried to post my calculations of what I had seen for the SIPs and how much money was left. There's Cyril rightly points out that he had a better method, so he gave about $800,000 left, whereas I had calculated anywhere from 4 million if you don't take in relativity and exchange rates. But when I calculated that the 10 cents that sand is worth now, I got 400,000. But Cyril, who probably has a more accurate method, calculated about 800,000. So, anyways, we're going to go over now some of the things that stuck out to me and others in yesterday's AMA, and then that might be about where we end it. So, yesterday's AMA, it was about 30 minutes long, similar to the December one, and the speakers were Sebastian Bourget, Cyril Forte, and Robby Yung. So Robby being the CEO of Animoca, Sebastian Bourget, who was the COO of, is now a global brand ambassador for the Sandbox, and Cyril Forte, who is the current Sandbox DAO administrator. So he oversees the team that implements the tech stack and processes SIPs. Okay, so they announced this the day before, saying that they were going to walk through the rationale scope of the DAO pause and the transition and what it means for the existing SIPs in the community. So this is in reference to the recent announcement of SIP-39, which is to pause the Sandbox DAO. I'm going to do an episode on that all by itself, like I normally do for other SIPs, where I do a read through. This one in particular, I'm going to save for another episode because there's some things I wanted to note out of that. So today we're just going to go over the reaction to the AMA and all the summaries of that, which is why we went over December 2025, because that, and to me that was a big part of why we're seeing what we're seeing right now. The SIP-39 DAO pause is really a byproduct of that. So here were some of my notes. I also included the Sandbox accounts notes as well as Shanti, who did a really good note section on it. But Panda Pops was the host. Seb, Robby, Cyril are speakers. And Shanti, one of his notes, I'll open up here on the forum. Shanti summarized that the core objective, as he saw from the AMA, was a pause of the DAO operations to relocate resources toward core product development and AI driven innovation. Some subcomponents of that were resource optimization, operational shift, AI and creator tools, and existing SIPs. Also, some next steps. So, in the resource optimization, Shanti noted that shifting focus from administrative DAO overhead to enhanced platform user experience and Sandbox 3.0 features. Then, under the operational shift, it would be transitioning the DAO to a dormant state. That's what they mean by when they say pause, effective April 1st, which is coming up pretty soon at the end of this month, or I guess 2 months from now. And then minimizing costs while maintaining the record of the Sandbox DAO. Then AI creation tools, which is prioritizing the development of AI-driven tools and the sand chain to empower creator economy. That part remains unchanged, except the introduction of AI as it's become an emergent technology within the industry. And then existing SIPs. Most approved SIPs will be honored through Q1, which was cool. I was really happy to hear that. However, 3 unstarted SIPs will be discontinued, one of which, so SIPs 26, 33, and 36. Let's take a look at what those are. So here on the Sandbox DAO website, you can see the proposals. Let's take a look. So it was SIPs 26, 33, and 36. 26 is the NFT collection management for Sandbox DAO. That was by Orthmart, Josephine, and the rest of his team, where they took the multi-million dollar collection that was endowed to the Sandbox DAO. They had been successfully refocusing that and curating it to a sandbox centric theme, had to liquidate some of that in order to do so. They were meeting all their metrics, all their milestones. They recently did a they recently did go to the discussion. They recently released their latest report, and oh, there's the flip book right there. Nice. So this was their latest report that they've been doing. I've been following along and going to their X spaces. It's really, really cool. I highly recommend looking at this. There is some, if you don't know anything about NFT management or curation, I highly recommend it. This was a lot of fun to follow, and they're clearly know what they're doing. So they have been reducing the assets from over 1,300 to 700, and had been giving the DAO back quite a bit of money. Let's look at how much it was. They had earned 400,000, so almost $500,000 that they had earned in their refocusing in order to acquire more sandbox specific things that are more related to our culture. So, for instance, less apes, more sandbox voxel things. That's some of the liquidations that would have been happening. So they were hitting all their targets. They were doing very well, but it looks like for whatever reason, I'm not quite sure, this was part of what was mentioned in discontinuing. So that made me sad because SIP-26 was clearly a success in implementing um, a refocusing of the NFT collection. So what else? Let's take a look at what else. So also SIP 33 and 36. 33 was the Sandbox Metaversity campus. I believe that one was in the Philippines. And then SEP 36 is the land estate sales. This one makes me a little bit frustrated because it would have been valuable regardless of whether the DAO was closed or not. This Sandbox land estate sale would have been a plugin through GBM, which, if you know what GBM is, it's now the Sandbox internal method for auctioning off land. So what that effectively means is it will remain extremely difficult to sell land in anything greater than a 1x1. So all of you that have estates, the 3x3s, 6x6s, 12x12s, 24x24, you will continue to have to jump through several hoops in order to sell your land estate, GBM was pre-approved and was already working on a way in order to make add that to their in-house capability. For people like myself that have estates, this was going to be a big help, a big boon, and would have been valuable regardless of the DAO because it would have been part of the Sandbox Games website. And it just makes me really, really sad that that's not going to happen. So let me show you what I mean. Here's the website, GBM auctions. So this was it. So you could have auctioned off an entire estate rather than privately listing dozens of one by one lands on OpenSea or risking unsafe OTC, other transaction or over the counter websites, some of which are most of them are gone. I tried to do that recently for an estate sale where I tried to buy someone's estate, and it was really difficult. We had to use a very convoluted method in OpenSea, and in some cases had to do an OTC, kind of like a trust based thing, which I do not recommend. I could only do that because I was sure of the recipient. They had been in the organization. Excuse me, they had been in the ecosystem for a really long time, so I knew of their authenticity. But that is not something I recommend, and we should not have to rely only on that. So you really, this would have been a great tool. I don't know why they stopped it. It was This is something the sandbox needed, not the DAO. But it looks like it's being caught up in all of this. So that'll be one of my comments back is to please exclude that from from it because we need that tool. And anyways, and then Shanti also mentioned the next steps here in his notes was following the 1 week discussion, a 2 week voting period, and then the sandbox team will vote in favor to support this transition. Um, Minor nitpick is that it needed 2 weeks per the sandbox SIP rules. I'm not sure. Maybe that might be an oversight. I thought I had heard it would just go through the discussion period. I didn't hear that it would only be 1 week. So hopefully it goes through a 2 week like it's supposed to in the SIP process, and then it will go through a 2 week voting period. Cool. All right. So that was Shanti's summary of what he had heard. So then the sandbox replies a little bit later on down about how um here, nope, that's me here. The sandbox then talks about the sandbox account. I'm not sure if it's Panda behind this or who is speaking here, but they said we hope today's AMA helps shed more light on the road ahead for sandbox. It did a little bit, but there were still a lot of questions that I think needed to be answered. I'm not sure when Panda was referencing the Q&A part where she got her questions from. I didn't see anything in the Discord or on the forums, so I would have loved to have submitted a few questions to help clarify what's happening and why we're seeing that. But the response from the Sandbox account here is that SIP-39 is intended to be both operational and strategic. It pauses the SIP intake, programs, and operations to preserve the DAO's assets and ensure it is best positioned once determined how the DAO should contribute in the context of the sandbox's evolving ecosystem and what the best future model should be. Okay, got it. So I mentioned here that the playback bug strikes again, and then here are my thoughts on it. I already went over the first two, but the Robby to me, what I heard Robby say was that the point of the pause is to conserve resources while focusing our efforts on Sandbox 3.0. And he specifically mentioned Sand Chain and Corners. I also heard him say that the Sandbox wallet will be voting with its 27 million voting power, which effectively means it's going to be extremely difficult uh, to outvote that. I was disappointed to hear him say this. I think out of everything, I was disappointed to hear the Sandbox say that we're going to be voting. I think that doesn't make this a community vote anymore. It just makes it kind of you know, they put it up for the community to vote on, but okay, got it. The vote is going to be massively swung in the direction of pausing the DAO. There really isn't much. I don't see much discussion happening. Myself, Shanti, Hishmad, and I believe Ixtura. I believe I also saw. Well, there's Yule, Kami, Victorin, Sebga. So they're okay. Daddy Mufasa, and then Intern, who is known as the DAO, but it's the Intern Sanctum. So there is some discussion about it. However, I'm not. This 1 week, 2 week discussion period is supposed to be where the author takes in that input and then modifies, adjusts, and improves their SIP before it goes to vote. I'm not sure that's happening here. It just seems like they're following the process, but they're gonna put their thumb on the scale to make it stick. And that, or by Verson also, that is really unfortunate to me. That doesn't seem like a community vote, and it seems like a continuance of of relying on internal deliberations that have. I don't think that's working. I think you should give the special council the chance to nominate its own community-based members, and then do special council and advisory board things. There are a lot of things that we've seen in other DAOs that are working when you build in public, but the special council and the advisory board that was nominated for its first term were nominated as a result of internal corporate deliberations, and they were not nominated by the community. And as a result, we had kind of absent leadership from the Sandbox, the special council advisory board. They weren't involved in the community. There were some things they did, some AMAs here and there, but they did not have any force shaping role that I think a special council and advisory board could have had. They could have been drumming up more momentum. They could have been hosting public meetings, similar to how Star Atlas DAO and Illuvium DAO, how they do things. And I think that's really unfortunate because we had a lot of community members, including myself, who wanted to run for the special council in order to start building in public and generating momentum. A lot of us know what buttons to press and what levers to pull in order to increase the participation. We most of us agreed on some of the fixes and the problems, but the slip intake had been slowed for a while now, and a lot of those changes didn't have a chance to take at all. So the retention problem is something we intended on addressing by building more features into the system and more tools. We also intended to make more working groups and do more X spaces, I guess you could say, live streams, building more in public, similar to what the Sandbox was doing some years ago in their live streams. They encountered enormous success at that time. So while we can't impact the product itself because that's under the Sandbox's development team, there are so many more enabling things that we could have been doing that have not been done because the special council and advisory board had full-time people doing, they had their own lives. Like Yatsu. Could you really expect Yatsu to be ingrained or nuanced and detailed at the day to day of the Sandbox DAO? No. So, in my opinion, that should have been, they should have transitioned the Sandbox Council a while ago. Maybe 6 months worth of setting the expectation and the vision of the DAO, and then nominating a new special counsel and an advisory board, because it became clear that those roles were underutilized to a great extent. And all you have to do is look at other DAOs and their special counsels to know that that's true. So that's my opinion on the matter. That's why I listed out these reasons, A, B, and C, to continue the DAO. The governance body does not have to be attached to the new funding SIPs. I don't know why they're saying that those two things have to be put together. I don't think they need to be. I think the governance bodies can continue without funding SIPs. So I'm not quite sure what is happening there because the community is not being included. They're just being like, "Hey, here's what we're doing. Here it is." There were no speakers other than the sandbox personnel. I didn't even have a chance to go up there to ask a question or two. It was a closed system, and in my opinion, and in many people's opinion, this closed system is how we got here. The continuance of the closed system, to me, will continue to keep us here. I think you need to involve the collective brain power of the community through leadership roles that have impact, and that's how we can get ourselves out of these holes that we're in. It doesn't have to be only the sandbox company that is trying to get us out. The community can. And restricting the DAO to SIPs that were heavily curated was was a good tool. It helped, especially when we did the Sandbox DAO grants program, but it's insufficient to move the needle. We need to be freed to perform our roles as they're specified in the DAO, and we weren't. We weren't. The progressive decentralization was extremely centralized, and it still is very centralized with the DAO admin team and the Sandbox DAO game controlling the vast majority of it. The I get it. I understand the reasons why. I interviewed Cyril and Seb, and I understand it. And I think if we're going to be considering a pausing of the DAO, then we should unlock the community to fulfill its larger role rather than piecemealing it little by little and then not giving it a chance to fully realize its potential and then kill it before that happens. That's what's happening with the pausing of the DAO is the the piecemealing potential is being killed before we've hit a threshold where the community is fully leveraging its collective brain power to overcome the obstacles of the sandbox ecosystem. The over reliance on internal corporate deliberations, the exclusion of community nominated bodies. The Sandbox DAO grants program was one of the best things I think that happened to the DAO. I am so happy that that happened. When I was one of the elected allocators, as were three others. When we were given the power to approve grants to bring people in, oh my gosh, man! Do you know how many people are still here because of that? 6 months later, it was a hugely enabling moment to me. That was the shining example of what happens when you empower the DAO to fulfill its leadership role and community nominated, community elected bodies. But the special counsel and advisory board terms expired December 31st, so 2 months ago. Elections did not happen on time, and now they won't if the DAO pauses. So, my opinion, we should not be pausing the DAO's governing bodies. You can do so in a very affordable means. It doesn't even have to be 120,000 per person, 120,000 sand per person, which is it is a rounding error almost to what remains. Not in USDC, mind you, but in terms of sand. And if you're being paid in sand, then I don't see how there is a great loss here in continuing the governing bodies. It is very affordable. And a lot of people want to continue. They want to try and help this problem out. But when internal corporate deliberations happen within the sandbox, they get projected onto the community who would like to do something different, and then they apply their voting power to ensure that it goes through. But I don't think that that is the right course here. I think that the governing body should continue. Special counsel and advisory board elections should happen. I understand that Robby doesn't seem like he shares that point of view. But he seems like a very reasonable person. Robbie seems like he's got his stuff together. He seems like he is ready to take the bull by the horns. He is taking the bull by the horns and trying to right the ship. I can't blame it. I can't blame him at all for what he's doing. I wish that there were other people in the room to advise him of information I don't think he's getting. So this podcast episode is an attempt to do that. It's an attempt to convey another point of view, which is based in rationale mathematics. I can demonstrate a lot of the stuff that I'm saying. I can prove it. And this DAO, this podcast, excuse me, SandDAO podcast, I went to great lengths to prove a lot of the stuff that I'm saying with numbers. And I think that the governing body should continue and that we can demonstrate performance if we did have special council elections, if we did have advisory board elections. Not every seat's going to be filled, by the way. So just manage expectations right up front. Maybe not 5 members will nominate themselves, but 3 is enough. 2 is enough. If it were just me nominating myself, I know for a fact 2 other people who want to nominate themselves. That's 3 members right there. Myself and the 2 other people. 3 people who are charged to make a difference in the ecosystem. We can start with the authority granted by the DAO. We can start really moving the numbers on participation and involvement and SIP stuff that matters to the ecosystem, that addresses player retention, that gives features and tool sets that people will use. So that's my plea. I'm not sure anyone will hear me. I'm not sure the Sandbox team will hear me. I hope they will. At least, hear out the community before you pause something that so many of us put blood, sweat, and tears into. So there it is. I'll end here with something that Seb posted. Seb posted a follow up to the AMA yesterday, and he wrote, actually, I think I linked it. I sure did. Let's look at it. So, Seb, who's a global brand ambassador now for the Sandbox, used to be COO, Chief Operating Officer of the Sandbox, beloved throughout the community. Seb posted this after the fact, and I'm going to read through some of it. As we discussed SIP-39, now up for vote, on pausing the Sandbox DAO after 1.5 years of operations, I want to take a moment to recognize the incredible contributions of the SandFam community. Thank you, Seb. Creators, Special Council, Advisory Board, delegates, and of course, the Sandbox DAO team. Which, by the way, the delegates are not paid, and they participate a lot. Anyways, let's keep going. Building a decentralized governance framework for a creator-first digital nation has been a bold experiment. That it has. Rich in learnings, collaboration, and collective effort. Absolutely. Over the past months, we've also shared the vision for Sandbox Game 3.0, which I'm supportive of. So many of us are supportive of that. Introduced Corners Internet, an on-chain incentive-driven approach to content discovery. I looked at it. I'll try and involve myself in it. And launched Sandchain, which most of us are trying to figure out how to involve ourselves in. So that would be helpful. On testnet to expand participation beyond gaming and unlock new economic surfaces for creators, communities, and curators. By the way, that surfaces is just like expanding the generic part of the sandbox to be more utilitarian, to give more utility on what we were talking about earlier. Creator tools, especially AI mobile, remain a top priority with more to come. This was in response to the Sandbox DAO publishing that they published a discussion port of SIP-39 in the Sandbox forums. So, yeah, I'm sad. I'm disappointed. I understand how we got here. I'm not at all opposed to trying something new. Yep, makes sense. And being in Robbie's position, I can understand. He seems like a very level-headed person. I hope that he hears this. I hope that the Sandbox team tells him about this stuff, that it doesn't have to be all or nothing in pausing the DAO. So, this realignment discussion here will, I think I went over the highlights of it, where it started in August 2025, the Big Whales article, Gaming Daily's article, Kate Irwin's tweet, Raf Block's tweet, and then Yat's article in Cointelegraph, and Sandbox statements, Arthur's statements, Robbie's statements. I think we went over that to the degree I don't need to go over it again here. So I'll just scroll through it, go ahead and pause it if on the playback, if that's something that you'd like to read into. I didn't see any community questions, although I'll check the chat. No community questions, and I don't have any open topics. So let's go ahead and outro. We just finished episode 67. Episode 68 will happen very soon. Actually, episode 68 is going to be an interview with Sebastian Bourget. So I need to go and fix that part here. And then that means episode 69 will be a read through of SIP-39 when it goes to snapshot, because that's when the real vote happens and all the changes would have been made to it. So what I really hope, though, if you're watching Sandbox team, is please consider removing SIP-36 from the pausing. Right, SIP-36. Let the GBA land estate one go through, please, because we want that. A lot of us need that. We still have estates that we want to trade. I would love to buy more, ironically enough, because I don't believe the sandbox is over. I am a true believer of it. So there's some estates that I might want to grab, and this is a safe way to do that. Please let SIP-36 land estate sales go through. It is a tool outside of the DAO. It functions within the Sandbox Game website. So please, and also let the governing body continue. Anyways. So episode 68, which is going to happen this Friday on the 6th, will be a return of Seb Bourget, global brand ambassador of the Sandbox. It's going to be a pretty it'd be great. I'm literally looking forward to it. It won't really be confrontational. That's not my style in these interviews to begin with. Seb has earned enormous respect. He's earned his place in the community. He's beloved by almost everybody in the community because he's just an advocate. He is a believer. He travels probably once a week to a different country. It almost seems like he's at every conference, and he does interviews, and he represents the Sandbox all the time. So I'm looking forward to that. I really it's going to be, I'll try to make it lighthearted, but given what's going on right now, there'll be some discussions about like, hey, what are your thoughts on this or that? And but I don't expect it to be confrontational at all. He's a friend of the community, and he'll be treated as such. So yeah, I mean, and I would love to interview Robbie. I'm still trying to interview Yat. But if Robbie, you're watching, I would love to host you on the show. I would love to interview you. It won't be confrontational. You'll be treated just like everybody else does. You can look at all of how many interviews have we done? 30 interviews, I think, on this podcast. And I respect how you're approaching things. You seem like you genuinely care about the Sandbox ecosystem. And now you have a vision for what it should be. And as CEO, you're imbued with the authority to refocus resources to that end. I don't want to stand in the way of that. That's not why I would want to interview you. I want to interview to understand, so the community can understand what's happening, and there'll be a few questions about what was behind the approach. Why pause the whole DAO? Why not continue just the governing bodies, even in a reduced capacity? I know that there's good answers for it. There's rationale. You didn't arrive at this spot just by, randomly deciding I want to go this route or that route. I know you have um, reasoning for it. I've listened to a number of your interviews. Um, Most recently, what was the one I just watched last night? It was the one where you were in the London cafe, eating with the other individual. Give me a second. Let me. Yeah, it was one of your restaurants not far from your office. And that was your words, by the way. I'm not saying that because I um, growing podcast. It was your growing podcast. Oh no, it was off script with Ton. So where you were eating together in London. So I just watched that and just it seems like a well spoken individual. Seems like someone who cares about the sandbox ecosystem, and yeah, I would love to interview Robbie and just understand what's happening because right now, hearing these X spaces for 30 minutes with questions that are prepared, I think by people other than the community is not really hitting the nail on the head. It's it is somewhat addressing the need for transparency, but it doesn't really get us there to the extent that we're looking for. There's obvious questions that need to be asked, in my opinion, that would help illuminate what's really going on here. And that's not to say that there's something nefarious going on. Not at all. Like I said, it sounds like there's some good rationale for it, but it's not obvious why these trade offs are being made at this time in this manner when there are other less intense solutions that are immediately um, that are immediate to a lot of us in the community that have been here for a while. Something like special council elections. So yeah, I'd like to do that if possible. And if not, then I'll just work with the information I have and review SIP-39. Then we'll do a review of Sandbox DAO here in 2026 because by that point, I'll probably wait until the 2 weeks are done with the voting. And if the DAO is paused, then I'll just do a closing review of the Sandbox DAO, all the SIPs that we did. I just finished preparing that model. I put it actually in the chat here for the forum post. Put, you know, oh, I put like here I prepared this very big spreadsheet about all the SIPs and did quite a bit of research and data crunching on the yes, no, the no vote, how much the SIP was worth at the time for the exchange rate that day of. So that's how I came up with a lot of these numbers. So I'm going to do kind of like a review of the Sandbox DAO at the end of it all. And then I'll do a review of this podcast after 60 plus episodes. Yeah, I'm going to do a review. And then if the DAO decides to pause, I think SandDAO podcast will likely pause with it because this podcast is dedicated to the Sandbox DAO. So I'm like I mentioned, I'm not going to probably get to the accidental sniping of a fellow ape when Yuga Labs broke the Guinness World Record that I broke 10 years ago. I went over that last episode a little bit, but in the review of the Sandbox Style podcast, maybe I'll touch on it briefly. I don't think I'll get to interviewing Mo at this point. It might be overcome by events. And I don't think I'm going to get to the sandbox ecosystem and the DAO or the business of being in the sandbox ecosystem, although I touched on it a little bit in this episode. So I think that's where I'll end it. I'm sad. I'm bummed. I'm disappointed. And anyone who's been in the Sandbox DAO, a lot of us feel the same way. So for Sandbox Spaces, where do we congregate? We're in the Sandbox DAO forums. We're in the Sandbox Game Discord under the DAO discussion channel. Hashtag SandFam, hashtag Sandbox DAO, hashtag Sandbox Game, a Rash Selective and Metaverse Editor push out content for the Sandbox DAO. Metaverse Editor, it does some awesome news reels type stuff, and Arrest Selective does some summary tweets about things that are happening in the Sandbox DAO. Also, at the Sandbox DAO YouTube, which has been a little bit silent recently, so Digging the Sand podcast hasn't had an episode in a while, and then SandDAO podcast, which is the thing you're listening to right now. Also, there's Bulls on the Block on Saturday. They continue to keep cooking. They have an estate within the Sandbox DAO, and also they a number of Sandbox people have overlap in that community. Also on Tuesdays, Whale members. Whale is Whale members. Whale DAO is one of the largest landowners in the Sandbox. We interviewed them in episode 61, whereas we interviewed the Bulls on the Block in episode 7. And check them out on Tuesdays on X, and then Bulls on the Block is Saturdays on X. Check them out. And last but not least, we will find someone to raid on Twitch so that we can pay it forward to someone else. Who do we have on? Is there anyone from the Sandbox on right now? No, there's not. It's unfortunate. There used to be a lot of other streamers for the Sandbox, but it's been gone down a lot lately. It's just been a drawdown, which is a bummer. So let's raid a friend of ours. Here we go. The raid has started. This was episode 67, a reaction of the DAO Pause SIP and all the things that led up to it from August 2025 when Robby came on as the new CEO, the realignment, and then the X Space in December explaining the way forward, and now the X Space from yesterday explaining what's to come for the Sandbox DAO vote. Thank you for your time, SamFam.